Welcome to the Green Living Now podcast. I'm your host, Amy Todisco Hartshorn, and I am so excited that you're here. In today's episode, I am talking to Amy Stein, a former medical researcher who has a really remarkable story. She had years of chronic illness with unexplained symptoms and the failures of Western medicine to help her figure out what was wrong with her led her to some incredible healing. She almost gave up. She used traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and other holistic approaches and detoxed her home, detoxed her food, and lives in a community where she regularly shares with others who have other types of expertise, and they support each other along the way. She's going to talk about the importance of community, of listening to your own body and self-healing, and the importance of living in harmony with Mother Earth. She is just phenomenal, and she works with people who want to use holistic and natural approaches to heal from chronic pain and disease. So let's get started. Amy Stein, welcome to the Green Living Now podcast.
Thanks, Amy. I'm excited to be here.
It's so fun to have another Amy.
Double Amy. Amy times
Yes.
two today.
Amy squared, exactly. So tell us about yourself.
I am a person who dealt with symptoms their whole life, had messages from my body, but I didn't understand what they meant. So I thought that I was broken. And I didn't know that there was something I could do about it. I just thought, like, this is my lot in life. I'm always going to have these symptoms happening. I'm always going to feel these things. I'm always going to be taught that it's wrong, that there's something broken with my body. And so I didn't realize that that actually wasn't true until probably my late 20s, early 30s, when I began to resemble chronic patients that I was working with. So I was working with geriatric population of chronic pain patients, and I was 27 and began to resemble them. And I thought, there's something going on here more than what I've been dealing with as a child. This is definitely a little bit more intense. I could no longer ignore the symptoms from my body. It got to the point that my body was shutting down. I became bedridden. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't leave the bathroom. It just got really, really bad, really fast. But it really wasn't fast. It just felt like that. My body had always been sending me messages. It had always been telling me that there was something wrong. I just didn't understand it, because we're not taught to speak the language that the body speaks. We're taught that everything needs to be rational, that it has to look a certain way, that we have to follow the rules, we have to do what everybody else does. And that's not true. But because you don't know any better and you don't learn how your body works or how it's designed to work, you think that it's broken. And that's the messaging that you hear, especially if you're a highly sensitive person like I am. So highly sensitive people, we've move through the world sensing everything around us. So we experience everything on a heightened level. We're hyper vigilant to what's going on in the world. And because of that, we are the canaries in the coal mines. We are the people who experience sickness first. And no one really understands that still. I mean, it's something that was coined in the 1990s, but it's something that the mainstream medicine and even functional medicine does not really have a great handle on it. They don't really understand. They still just focus on the mental and the physical aspects of the body. But the body is so much more complex than that. It's not just mental and physical. It's emotional, it's spiritual, it's energetic. It's also electric. So if you have all this trapped energy in your body, it has nowhere to go. So it's going to create symptoms. It's going to manifest as disease. And because we're taught you take a pill, you cut the part off, you have surgery, you go to the physician, you do the protocol, we're not taught anything else. And when that doesn't work, we think there's something wrong with us. We're broken. So I work with those people who resemble how I was. They felt broken. Western medicine failed them. They're sick and tired of being on that merry-go-round to nowhere. They're sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. I introduce them to things that are old, but actually work. So it's ancient healing that has been around for thousands of years, and it works. And it's a unique, individualized approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all t-shirt.
Right. And so you call yourself a trauma-informed health coach, is that right? And these ancient systems that you're talking about, are there names of those
Yeah,
systems
so
that you can
traditional
share?
Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, I
Ah. Oh,
Ching,
those
indigenous
ones.
medicine. Yeah, those ones,
Okay.
right? So like the original medicine was earth medicine,
Right.
but we've gotten away from that. And we think we've gotten away from it recently, but it wasn't so recent. It was really like the 1950s where things started to drastically change. You know, the Flexner Report was written in 1930. And that was when they started to standardize all of the medical schools. And it was based upon we want to use pharmaceuticals because JD
Yes.
Rockefeller and Carnegie were oil barons and they can make more money with petrochemicals. So they said everything else is bad. Osteopathic is bad. Naturopathic is bad. Chiropractic, homeopathy, all of that is bad. It's
Right.
not real medicine. Herbalism, it's not real medicine. But that is what medicine had been for thousands of years. And it
Right.
worked. And
Right.
now they introduced this new system of medicine that's standardized. Everybody learns the same thing in medical school. Everybody does the same thing. They treat just the symptoms with surgery, with medication, right?
Right.
Everything else about the body is ignored. The whole system, the whole body is ignored. The whole person is ignored. We parcel it out, right? You have GI issues, you go to the GI doctor. You have headaches, you go to the neurologist. You
Right.
have kidney issues, you see a nephrologist, right? Like you start with the GI doctor, you get referred out. This system is novel. It's not the way it always was, and it doesn't work.
It's kind of amazing to me that we adopted it. I mean, these
Didn't
2
have a
rich
choice.
guys. Right, no, we the people didn't. Well, I guess it makes sense from a corporate profit standpoint, right?
Right. Right.
There was big money to be made doing medicine this way, and, it's appalling to me that even now, very rarely do doctors get any nutritional information when they're
4
trained.
hours. They get 4 hours in
4.
medical
Yeah,
school.
that's
4
crazy.
hours. Yeah.
So let me rewind a little bit. You were only 27 when you were dealing well, you had symptoms before this, but the peak of this was
The crux of it. Yep.
age
Was
27. And
27.
so how did you start to do things differently?
So not at first, right? Warning, disclaimer, this was not an overnight thing, right? Like I'm
Right.
15 years through it. So I was on that merry-go-round to nowhere. I worked in Western medicine. I was a medical researcher. That was all I knew, right? Like
Right.
I was sick as a kid. My parents took me to the doctor. I didn't know anything else. And when people would say other things, I'd be like, oh, there's no science to that. That's woo-woo, right? Very dismissive of it
Oh,
because I wanted to see the science, not knowing that there is lots of science, but it's not discussed, it's not talked about because it's not glamorous. It doesn't make you money, right? It's like cheap and effective. So we don't talk about that because of corporate greed. And so
right.
I didn't understand this living under. I just knew that every year I had to get a physical and a flu shot working at the hospital, that I worked with chronic pain patients. They were all on medication. So that was the paradigm I understood. That was the paradigm I knew. I went to see the doctors I worked with. They were like, here, take this medication, come back when it gets worse. They treated me like anybody else, even though we had worked together for 4 years. And I was like, what is going on here? So I was aware of what was going on, but I was so sick and I was so depressed and I was so much in despair and not knowing what to do. Again, we're taught to always look outside of ourselves. We're so disconnected from the innate wisdom that lives within us and also disconnected from the innate wisdom that lives in Mother Nature. So I again looked to the person in the lab coat. I was wearing the lab coat and could not help myself. So I looked to another person in a lab coat. And I thought they had the answers because that was what I was taught in school. You get sick, you go to the doctor, they fix you. I did not get fixed. So I was on this merry-go-round for about 3 years. I saw all the specialists in New York, right? Like I live close to Manhattan. We went into Manhattan. We saw everybody there. No one would agree on a diagnosis. Nobody knew what to do to help me. Any medications or procedures they prescribed for me, I only got sicker. And then I began to question things. So I was labeled a difficult patient. I
Oh,
wasn't being
wow.
compliant. And the issue is when you are a compliant patient, you actually are not helping yourself. When you actually are asking the questions, you have a vested interest in your life. That is a good patient. That is somebody who actually cares about their well being and wants to get better. The patient that just goes along and follows the plan, takes the pill, the patient is not going to get better because they're still looking to that other person to fix them.
Right.
I cannot fix somebody else. I can only fix myself, and no one else can fix me. But again, these are not lessons that we're taught as children or as adults. Right?
Right. And did you have anybody with you during this time that was kind of a patient advocate for you?
So my mom took me to most of my appointments
Oh,
because I
good.
could not drive myself. I was so sick. I couldn't barely get out of bed. So my mom took me to a lot of the appointments. But again, she was raised in the same system of you're the doctor, they fix you. And so she would ask questions. We would constantly bring up things and we would get dismissed. And I would be told, you didn't go to medical school. I did.
Oh my
And I was
word.
like, but I could do my own research. I've done research for over a decade. I can do research. I understand research. But my brain was so I could not form sentences. And I thought at one point I had a brain tumor because I would get into arguments with people like my parents and my husband. that I said one thing when I would say something completely different. And I would be adamant that, no, I said this thing. They're like, you did not say that thing. I'm like, I did, because my brain was so inflamed. It was so inflamed. It was on fire and it was not functioning properly. And that's the thing. Your body will shut down parts of you that are not essential. It's going to shut down your GI system. It's going to shut down your sleep ability. It's going to shut down some of your organs because it doesn't deemed essential. Like essential
Right,
is
right. For
survival. You're
survival.
designed for survival. So if you're
Right,
breathing, you're alive. Like we did
right.
our job and that's the bare minimum, but it's not going to do a heck of a whole lot more than that.
Okay, so you went through all these appointments, your mom took you to many of them. What was the turning point for you? When did you start to look into these alternatives that were actually the ancient medicines, like you said?
Yeah. So the turning point was actually there was a few. So there was a few incidents that occurred where I just was so baffled that I was being told this information. So one incident was I went to a very, very renowned hematologist here because they thought I had this rare blood disease. And so the tests all came back quote unquote normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and he said, well, this is my suggestion to you. I'm going to give you chemotherapy. I'm going to kill your entire immune system and hope that it grows back.
Oh my word. You gotta be kidding me.
No, thank you. I don't have cancer. We don't know what I'm dealing with. He's like, it's all autoimmune in nature. I'm like, that is not a solution to me. I'm not going to do that.
Oh,
And I looked at my mother and I said, I'm not doing that. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was we were accepted into Johns Hopkins, which you have to be basically dying for them to
yeah.
take you, right? So again, you go with your briefcase of lab work and you hope that someone can fix you and that someone has the correct diagnoses and what they prescribe is going to work. And I was kind of at that point where I was done, but I was doing it for my family because they were so invested in this of me getting better. And I knew that this paradigm was not working, but I didn't yet know what I was going to do because I was still so shut down from my intuition and like that inner wisdom that I had been taught from a child not to listen to it because I got in trouble when I did, right? Like I saw things that weren't there. I felt things that other people couldn't see. Like I was so sensitive to the energy that as a child, the message was, there's something wrong with you. Stop paying attention to that. That's not real. So even when my body was so bad, it was like, oh, this is not real. But a part of me was like, this is very real and you are dying unless you do something different.
Yeah.
And so we were down there. It was right after Christmas into New Year's. And I remember just being completely just going through the process. I had no hope whatsoever. And that was the first time that my husband had really gone to any of the appointments. And he was disgusted by the whole experience. And he was like, how are you not angry? I am so far beyond angry. I'm in despair and I've just given up. I literally have nothing left in me to do this anymore. So I'm just done with all the doctors. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die. I've made my peace with that. And so obviously he did not like to hear that. My
Of course
family did
not.
not want to hear that. But I had made my peace that like this was it. I was done. And that's when I began to quiet everything out. And that was when I was able to listen to my intuition. That little voice that had been whispering for so long was like, there's another way. And I was like, what is that way? And then I say this, the universe will give you breadcrumbs. I got an email about this herbalism summit. And then there was this herbalism book that had come out and I got an email about it. And it was all this stuff and it was leading me towards plant medicine. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh. And my gram had recently passed and she had some books about plant medicine. And my parents were like, hey, do you want these books? And I think I want the books.
Wow.
And so that's what led me on this plant medicine journey over a decade later that I'm still on. I still have this reverence for the plants and Mother Earth, and it grows deeper the longer I do it.
I want to talk about that in a minute, but one thing that just popped in, did your grandmother talk to you about herbs at any point before she passed?
No, I had grown up with a garden. We were big gardeners, but I did not understand at that point that every plant that grew had medicinal purpose. Again, that was not something that was taught to us, right?
Right.
I don't think she really had an understanding of it. She was doing some research about it because this was the time when they were doing HRT and it was coming out that it was causing cancer.
Oh,
So
yeah,
she
yeah.
was looking into other things. And so she had some of these herb books and she had written in them, she had highlighted some things. And so it was just great to have that memorialized after she had passed. But I felt it was her letting me know this is the direction to go. Follow this
Yes.
path. I started it, pick up the lead from here. This is where you go. I just got the chills because it really felt divinely orchestrated.
Yeah.
And I felt so disconnected from myself, so disconnected from, I had no community, right? I lost a lot of friends. I didn't have any quality of life. I was really in a bad place. And
Yeah.
this is the thing. It's like, it doesn't have to stay that way, right? Like you have the ability to make the changes. You have the ability to take the reins back and say, no,
Right.
I'm in control. This is my life.
Right.
I get to decide what's best for me, not the doctor, not my parents, my spouse, not my
That's
friends and
critical.
family, not, yeah, like not society. I get to decide what's best for me.
Yeah, totally.
What
So,
a,
all right. So you started trusting yourself. You got some information sort of
Mhm.
from your grandmother, potentially, at least through her
Yeah.
books and, whatever other realms she might have been trying to communicate with you on. And so you started with herbs. Was that the first step?
Well, the initial thing that I did was I got rid of everything in the household that had chemicals in it.
Ooh, okay. So talk about that. How did you even discover
That
what
was the
things
first
had?
step of, like, doing something different was I got rid of all of the chemicals. So I threw everything out. I donated all the cookware. I got all new cookware. I got rid
Because
of
it was Teflon or
yeah, I had
aluminum or
nonstick.
something?
I'd gotten at my bridal shower, which was really nice, but was really deadly. And so, I got rid of all of the plastic. I got rid of all of the chemicals to clean the house.
Yep.
We weren't using plugins, but I had candles. I threw those all out
Yep.
because at that point I could not deal with any sort of chemical smell anyway. So I was like, I'm just
So
going to
you
throw it all out.
knew so kind of going back to that canary in a coal mine theory, you knew just based on your own reaction to these
Yeah,
different mainstream
but
products
it was
that
bad.
it was causing you issues.
Yeah, I knew because I knew, like, for instance, if my husband put on cologne, I immediately got a headache. And I was like, you cannot wear that. Or if he put aftershave on and came to bed, I'm like, you need to sleep somewhere else. Or if he was cooking something and it
Yeah.
started to burn, I'm like, you need to open the window. It was very apparent and it became more sensitive the sicker I became, right? Because
Oh, wow, of
I
course.
became stuck in a frozen state, right? My body was just in overload and could not deal. So everything was triggering me, everything. So things even before that I was semi okay with growing up were now bad. Plus, I was in a moldy house. I grew up in a
Oh
moldy
gosh.
house. I live on an island. So it's kind of like everyone has mold regardless. It's just how bad is it? It was bad. I knew it was bad when we bought the house. Again, I wasn't believed, right? Like,
Oh,
I
man.
wasn't believed by the realtor who was my friend. I wasn't believed by my husband. I was like, "There's mold in this house," and he was like, "Oh, it's fine. We'll do it." And I was like, "Okay." So it was a perfect storm. So I moved into this house after we got married. We had already had it for about a year before that. I immediately became much sicker. I was in mold at the university.
Or
There was a
7.
lot of yeah, there was a lot of variables, and that's the thing.
Yeah,
It's not just one thing, right? It's
right.
not just the dirty water. It's not just the dirty air. It's not just the EMF. It's not just the heavy metals. It's not just the
Right.
glyphosate. Your body can handle a certain amount,
Right.
but the body is not designed for the modern day world of the constant 24/7 bombardment of toxins. And
Correct.
so I didn't understand all of that yet, but I knew that something had to change. So I got rid of everything. And I had already changed my diet. I had already been eating much cleaner. Like I was no longer eating any processed food. At that point, I knew I had celiac, even though the test had come back negative. I was not
Yeah.
going to go back to eating gluten because it was so painful to my body to eat it. And I was so sick anyway. Like at that point, I was 85 pounds, had 2 broken feet. Yeah, like it was bad. And so again, the doctors were like, this is all normal. And I'm like, this is not normal. There's something wrong here. So even at that point, the first 3 years of still going to conventional doctors, right? I had started to make these changes on my own. And when I would ask them, do you think I should change my deodorant? They're like, there's nothing wrong with your
Oh
deodorant.
gosh.
So I had already been doing that stuff even while I was still going to the doctors.
Right.
But then when I quit the doctors, it was like hardcore.
Yeah.
At that point, then I was making my own cleaning products because it was cheaper. At that time, there really was not like quality, affordable cleaning products on the market. I
So wait,
started
before
my
you
own,
go on from there, just
yeah.
share a little bit about what you made. What did you use?
I basically make everything with like vinegar,
Yeah.
Castile soap, dish soap, and baking soda and essential oils.
Yeah.
Everything is made from that and cleans my entire
Yeah. I mean, I pretty much use Castile, Bon Ami, distilled white
right,
vinegar,
right.
and I do buy, a natural dish soap
Yes,
just because I feel like otherwise, Castile soap kind of leaves a film.
it does. And it goes so it's so thin that it doesn't really suds up
That's true.
properly.
That's
to
true.
get like
I mean, because
greasy.
I remember when I first discovered Dr. Bronner's, I would
Yeah.
use it as a shampoo,
Yes.
but then after a while, that doesn't
Yes. It
look
doesn't
great on
get
the
the,
hair.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So you kinda have to
Yeah,
use a
so it's
real
like it's a
shampoo.
trial and error with all of this, right? Because it's
Yes.
a whole big process of unlearning, which I discuss
Yes,
in
yes,
the
of
book that's coming
unlearning,
out.
that's exactly
Yeah,
right.
unlearning everything you thought you knew about sickness and health, unlearning everything you thought you knew about how to live, what's good for you and what's not.
Right,
Again, it's all taught to you by age 7. Your belief system is formed. Bruce Lipton talks about
totally.
this,
Oh,
right?
yes,
Epigenetics.
absolutely.
Yeah. So like you don't have your own ideas. They are all
Right,
passed down to you. So whatever society, culture, parents, school, teachers tell you, that's what it is. And so this keeps you looking outside of yourself. It keeps you
right,
disconnected from yourself. It keeps you disconnected from what exists that can help you, which is Mother Earth. Because in our society, we revere technology. We
right.
revere being on a screen, asking Google, like again, like we don't trust anything that we learn from Mother Earth or from what we have inside of us. And that's what creates this disconnection, but it also
Right,
creates the illness in the body because you're
right.
actually disconnecting from your innate.
Did you do any reading of how to live a non-toxic, eco-friendly life, or did you just kind of
I
try
it's
different
it,
things? I mean, you must have
yeah, it's
gotten
hard to
some
trust.
information somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, back then, so like 13, 14, 15 years ago, there was a lot more information out there that was
Yes.
not censored. It was easier to find information about the dangers of things. Now it's a little bit shorter. You have to go like into the fifth page of your search results to find accurate information. So I read a lot of books. The library was my best friend. I
Yeah.
got all of the books 'cause I couldn't afford it. We were on a budget with one household. And so I tried to do it as cheaply as I could. And I tried to do everything myself, which is in some ways manageable. In some ways, it's not. Like if you
Yeah,
don't
I did
feel
that
good,
too.
it's really hard to do everything yourself and it can be very time consuming. So then I started to find people that I could trust. Like my girlfriend made soap. I bought the
Oh,
soap from
cool.
her because I knew what was in it. She raised the animals,
Oh, wow.
cows, pigs, chickens, eggs, turkeys. So I would get my meat from her.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so it was about starting a community, and then she would get the herbalism information from me. Then when I started doing homeopathy, she would get that information from me. So it was like we started this community. Then she would refer her friends to me. I would refer my friends to her. So we start this whole community, right?
That's
And
beautiful. And
yeah,
this is
and so
on Long
that
Island?
yes,
Yeah.
so that's been I guess 10 years we've been so, now we do workshops together and things like that where we educate people about foraging and herbalism and eating real
Oh,
food and what you put on it in your body. But this has been like a whole culmination of over a decade of doing this myself
right,
and finding out what worked for me. Again, there's no magic pill. There is no
right.
one special diet for anybody. Like I feel
Exactly. No
better
one
eating.
size fits all.
Exactly. I feel better eating pasture-raised meat, but I can't eat pork. I can't eat eggs.
Interesting.
My
That's
body just
fascinating.
doesn't like, it does not respond well. And so other people can eat those things.
Right, right.
So and some people feel better without meat. I did not. I felt
Yeah.
worse. Most people with autoimmune will feel worse without meat.
I've heard a number of people on podcasts talking about the autoimmune diseases that they had and how they had to go carnivore, like eat
Yes.
mostly
Yeah.
meat. And I thought
Yeah.
that was so fascinating
Yeah.
because, we've been told that meat is inflammatory
Right.
and yet
But that's
it is the only
conventional
thing.
meat. Yeah, that's conventional.
Ah, right. So just for listeners, I want to make sure we're talking about
Yes.
organic poultry, grass-fed, grass-finished
Right. So
when it
if you
comes to
find a
meat, I just
farmer.
feel like
Yeah.
we don't want animals that are eating GMO grains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Right. But if you can find a farmer who is doing pasture raised, like my girlfriend, she eats her own food. So those animals
Right.
they're well cared for. They're fed
Yeah.
high quality feed. They have a good life, right? Where
Yes.
conventional animals do not have a good life.
Oh,
They are
that's for
not fed
sure.
quality food. They're suffering. And then you
Yeah,
ingest that energy when you eat that animal. And
exactly.
so if you're already ill and you're continuing to eat conventional meats, you're getting the antibiotics, you're getting the herbicides, the Roundup, the pesticides, the insecticides,
Yep.
and you're getting all of that toxic energy that animal
Right. And the
has from a
stress.
miserable life
Yeah.
and then being slaughtered and being tortured, right? So
Yeah.
when people are like, I can't believe you eat meat and you care about Mother Earth, I'm like, but I eat responsibly
Yeah.
because I know where my meat comes from.
Exactly.
I know how it's raised.
It's a very challenging topic, I would say, because
Yeah.
I feel like for me, philosophically, I feel like I'm a vegetarian in the sense that I don't ideally love eating animals, because obviously they have to die for us to be
Right.
able to do that. And yet I tried for a year to do vegetarian. I actually did no red meat for like 15 years. And
Mhm, mhm,
interestingly, the one thing I missed the most was, well, two things, steak and bacon. But like you, I choose animals that are raised and are, living a healthy, happy life for the most part. And yes, there's the unfortunate part about the end.
mhm,
Um, and, there's this whole conversation around, well, were we designed to eat meat? I mean, we have these types of teeth,
mhm.
that's a whole conversation. So I totally understand the
Yeah.
struggle that some people have with that. And I think it's a matter of what you've done and what I've done. You figure out what works for you, right?
Yes.
So you discovered that eggs and pork are not good for you.
Right.
That's really important. All right. So cool thing that you talked about creating this community with other people.
Hmm.
Can you say a little bit more about what that's like and how many people are involved and what tips maybe you might offer to our listeners?
Yeah, so what was hard for me is trying to do it all by myself, right? Because I had been disappointed by so many people most of my life, like the
Yeah.
adults, the doctors, friends left. I wanted to just do it all by myself. I didn't want to rely on anybody else,
Right.
right? But unfortunately, in order to heal and have lasting results, you need to heal in community. You need to be supported. And so it was really hard for me to find someone that I could trust, one that had enough skills to support me on the journey. They had more skills than I did
Mhm.
because I had a lot more skills than most people and most doctors.
Yeah.
And so it's about having that support and feeling safe to be back in the physical body to allow the healing process to occur because the body's designed to do that, but it cannot do it and fight and heal at the same time. So if you're fighting and resisting the process, or if you're fighting and resisting the people around you, or you're trying to prove that you're right, or
Yeah.
prove that you can put your body in submission, that is not going to allow for healing. The body can only heal or fight. It can't do both.
Yeah.
So I was still in this, I call it manic healing, trying to do everything, but I was only doing it in my head. So I'm going to do this protocol, and then I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to switch to this diet, and then I'm
Huh.
going to do this thing, and I'm going to do that thing. But I was still not landing in my body. Like most people, I was still numb from the neck down.
Mm.
So when I was able to bring people in a communal sense that could support me and I could in turn support them, my body relaxed. I was able to
Mm.
integrate everything I had done only in my mind. It started to land in my body. And then I started to see the healing happen
Oh, that's awesome.
quicker and smoother than it had before.
Yeah.
So, the people that I have in my life now are people that are supportive, or people that understand what I need. And if they're not, I'm polite, but I choose to not really have a lot to do with them because
Yeah.
I cannot, at this stage in my life, I realize now at 42, I'll be 42 in October, like I don't need to be everybody's friend. I don't need to be liked by everybody. I don't need to do what everyone else wants me to do because I did my whole life like that and it did not serve me.
Yeah.
And so now this is my time. And if you don't like it, that's fine. But I don't really care if you don't
Well,
like it.
it's interesting. I kind of add that piece into living a non-toxic life,
Yeah.
surrounding yourself with not toxic people.
Right. And
Yeah.
people that are of a similar mindset. Like, so my friend group, for the most part, there are still some people that still live a conventional lifestyle. Do I shame them about it? No, that's
Right.
their choice, but I'm not going to live that way. And
Sure.
so a lot of people think the way I live is very radical
Huh.
because I don't spend a lot of time
Even
at the
now.
computer. Yeah. I mean,
Uh-huh.
people that are not in my friend circle, like they think it's radical, like, oh, why don't you eat out? Why don't you drink alcohol? Why don't you on the computer all day? Why can't you be at this place with EMFs? Why can't you be at this place that there's
Mm.
chemicals? Like, what's the big
Mm.
deal? I stopped explaining myself to those people because
Yeah.
they will never get it. It's not my point to try to convince, right?
Right. Right.
But most people in my friend group, they understand that living back to basics, which is the approach I took for my own healing and that I use with clients,
Yes.
works.
Right.
And it creates a less stressful life and it creates a life more in harmony with Mother Earth. And the innate wisdom in her is the same innate wisdom that's within me. So I feel better
Yeah.
living that way. And that's all that matters, that I feel better. It
Exactly.
doesn't matter how anybody else feels about it because they're
Right.
not in my body.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit more about the connection with Mother Earth. So
Right.
what did you discover about the connection to Mother Earth and also what happens when we don't have that kind of connection?
Yeah. So right now is a perfect example of not having connection to Mother Earth. Most people are connected to their device. They're connected
Yes.
to the screen. Like that's
Yes.
their end all be all. And because of that, they are anxious, they are depressed, they are overwhelmed, they don't sleep, they don't go to the bathroom every day. Their body is sending them messages constantly. Like they just are numb from the neck down. Like they
Yeah.
don't understand they're surviving. They're stuck in a
Yes.
survival state, but it's normal because everybody else is doing it. So that
Yes.
they don't think it's abnormal because that's how the rest of the world is living. But when you choose to disconnect in a way like you and I do, you can see that there's so much more out there
Mm.
that's available for harmony, for healing, for balance. So Mother Nature has examples of these as well as resilience and adaptability. So as much as we polluted and destroyed her, she's still there. She's still
Exactly.
resilient. She's still adapting. She's still fighting,
Yeah.
right? But in her own way. There's a harmony that exists within everything in Mother Earth, right?
Yeah.
So the trees, the flowers, all of the plants, the fungal community, the insects, the animals, they are all in harmony with each other.
Yes.
We are the one creating the problem, not
Yeah, and
them.
you know what's so fascinating to me is I've been doing this series of posts on Facebook for, I don't know, 9 months at least now. And the ones that are nature related typically are the ones that people really resonate with. So the other day, I put a video of a mother deer and her twins that were coming down the road as I was coming back to the house. 605 people later, was like, wow. So I feel like we are craving that. We know inside of ourselves that that is what is natural and normal for us. And yet, I mean, I grew up in New York City. I know you're not too far from New York City. And I've been lucky enough to live in Vermont for the last 23 years where I feel like I get to live kind of the more normal life for me, right? Because
Mhm.
for me, living in a city was crazy. And
Yeah.
so I get to experience a moose on my lawn or a snapping turtle coming down the driveway and paying attention to the weather. Living on an organic farm, we're all about the weather during the
Right.
season. So I feel like many of us have that longing. We don't necessarily make the time or move to a place where we can have that. But I realized even when I take walks, if I'm in my head thinking about all the different things that I need to do or, whatever it is, I'm not really being present. I'm not really
Right.
noticing all those cool things like, oh, wow, look at that interesting, thing
Mhm.
growing on the tree or, oh, wow, what a cool bird or, whatever it is. And so I feel like that's one of the things that I even living this way still have to remind myself to do, to be present in the moment, to look for all I mean, when you look around, we are so lucky to be
Mhm.
living on this amazing planet that is absolutely magical. I mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's just it boggles my mind, but what are some of the things that you find that you do?
Yeah, I think it's a practice of awareness, right? Because
Yeah,
most people are living so unconsciously, like they're just going through rote behavior, right? It's just the Groundhog's Day of like, let me do the same thing over and over again and hope for a different outcome, right? So 600
right.
people, 5 people watched that video. How many people of those actually went outside to see if they could see
Right.
their own deer,
Yeah,
right?
good question.
But I'll watch the video and I'll like it, but I won't actually
Vicariously.
get off the couch. I won't actually get off the couch and see if I have
Yeah,
that in my backyard. Right.
yeah,
So it's this disconnection from how I'm spending my time, what I'm choosing to ingest, whether that's visual, whether that's oral, whether that's audio, right?
yeah,
It's such an issue to the system. It creates such imbalance that people are not aware of it until it's brought to their attention. And then it's like the discipline to actually do it, you have to be dedicated to actually
yeah,
do it. I say sometimes you're not desperate enough to make the changes. I'm like, okay, so you're still coexisting at this rate with all these symptoms,
yeah,
but you don't want to make the changes. So you're not desperate enough yet.
yeah,
Okay. Like
yeah,
that's your choice, right? But it's like, what point does it have to get before you decide to make the changes? And so by writing this book and doing these interviews, I hope that people don't get to the point where I was bedridden, 85 pounds, 2 broken feet, being told that's all normal,
jeez.
and then decide, like, oh, I don't think this is normal. Like, it doesn't need to get to that point. You have the ability to make the changes now. It's small steps, right? To not overwhelm the system because the system is designed for safety. And big steps aren't jarring to the system.
Yeah,
Big change is jarring to the system. But very small changes, the system will tolerate because then you bring in safety. You bring in that safety aspect of being supported, bringing back in the physical body. That's why I use breath work, because it's so important. It allows people to feel what it feels like to be in their body, to see how magical the body is. Like, you don't need to take mind altering drugs to have this
Right.
experience.
Right.
You could just do a breath practice of a very gentle breath and have the same experience. So it also allows for curiosity, for people to be like, oh my God, that's what happened in my body. Let me wonder how I could actually do something beneficial to work with my body rather than against it.
Right.
And it allows them to be receptive then to make the changes.
Yeah.
If they're so like, oh, I'm not going to make any changes. We do breath and they're like, you know what? I think I'm going to change my shampoo.
Mm.
I think I'm going to change my food. I think I'm
Yeah.
going to, and so I support them on the small changes,
Yeah.
but it gets to be the way that you want it to look, right? It's an awareness of, how am I living my life? Is it in alignment? Is it with integrity? Am I being authentic? What I say on these podcast interviews is how I live my life. If you were to come over randomly, you would see me doing the things that I talk about, because that's how I
Exactly.
live my life. There is
Well,
no dissonance between what I say and do.
right. And you talk about this journey in your book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody wanted to get your book, Amy, where would they find you?
It should be on Amazon.
So so we'll be able to link in the show notes where people can
Yes.
get your book. Did you have a breath work thing or
Yes,
something
it's
you
a
were
free
gonna also?
guided breathwork meditation that I've recorded for people so they can feel what it feels like to be in their body and experience what happens. Like, maybe you get this great insight. Maybe you're in the shower later and you have this great idea. Maybe you have this dream. Maybe you're driving the car and you're like, you know what? I'm going to do this thing instead, or I'm going to call this person.
In the show notes, we will have a link to get your book and also a link for your free breath work. What did you call it?
It's a guided breathwork that's inspired by Mother Earth.
Oh, nice. Well, all right, you gotta tell me quickly, what does that mean?
It's interesting, like, when I started doing breath work and actually being in my body, because before I used it to escape from all the symptoms in my body,
Oh,
and so commonly people do that, like, you have a tool and you use it then to escape out of the body rather than actually return to the body, because you don't feel safe to be in the physical body, because we're not taught how to have that, and if you've had incidents in your life that have created issues, you've
right,
learned how to escape from your body.
right.
So, when I started to do the trauma informed coaching program, a lot of stuff was coming up. And I'm like, oh, I thought I worked through all this stuff. Like, what's going on? And so I would turn to Mother Earth and I'd be like, how can you support me? And it started my plant communication journey of these plants
Oh,
that I had thought only had this one particular use, right? Of like, oh, this is good for this thing, because that's how people typically teach herbalism. It wasn't the way I was taught, but it was something that I still would be like, oh, yeah, that thing is good for that. It was still the mindset I had.
right,
And she'd be like, use that plant. And I'd be like, for what? And then I would use it and I would have this great experience. And then, of course, because I didn't believe it could be, I would go and research and be like, what is going on with this plant? And then I would see like, oh, this plant is also good for blah, 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 or this plant in harmony with this other plant. So she would tell me which plants to put together for medicinal herbs, for my balms or for my tinctures. And I would create
and
these
when
blends. I'm like, this is amazing.
yeah, so when you say "she," you're talking about Mother Earth, like,
Mother Earth.
you have a
Yeah.
direct communication. Does that come into your mind in sound, words? How do
It
you get that?
comes so it's interesting. It changes at times. So initially I would see images of the plants, or I would just have this idea, this knowing of put these plants together as I was doing my breath practice. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Let me write that down.
Yeah,
And then I would go and I would do my research, because again, like the science person and me wanting
of
the
course.
research. And I'd be like, yeah, these plants together are like really dynamic, because they all support the nervous system, or they all support the bioenergetic field, or they all
Yeah,
support the brain health, or something like that. Right. And I was like, that's really cool. And then I would also get the idea for the names while I was in my breath practice. And I'd be like, oh, that's cool. So her infinity has become much stronger the more I do these somatic practices, right? So somatic practices are just being in the body. The
right,
more information is downloaded to me,
mm,
and my stronger connection to that information and to the intuition of what is right for me,
right,
or what I need to tell somebody else, like a client. I'll be like, oh, I need to tell that client about this thing. It's
mhm,
really, that would be great for her.
yeah.
Or I'm going to do this thing in the class. I'm going to talk about this aspect of it, because I think it's going to lead to this one person needing to know this idea in a different way. And
Sure.
so when I give classes, I talk about that. Like, we don't need to look at it in the way we've always known. There's so many other ways to look at it. And I'm constantly learning from the plants
Yeah.
new things. Like, it's a constant evolution. That's what I love about plant medicine. It's not like one and done.
Yeah.
That if you're doing it the way that nature intended, there's a constant evolution of learning and discovery.
Yep. That's beautiful. I think that's true for our lives,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the microcosm of it, whereas our life could be the macrocosm of, listening to ourselves, our intuitive connection
Mhm.
to the divine or whatever one wants to call that, and also the earth. I feel like there's those two levels of connection.
Yes,
They're actually
absolutely.
probably the same. But
They're
um
in harmony with each other, right? So
exactly.
at one time, one is more predominant than the other, but
Right.
it's a balance. And when we don't allow the body to maintain that balance
Right.
throughout all aspects, emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, and energetic, that's when things are skewed and that's when things are
Agreed.
off. And that's when you're like, oh, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on what it is.
Yes.
And that's why healing takes the ability to do all those aspects.
Right.
And so
Yeah,
that's
and
all touched on.
I think one of the things that just to sort of wrap this up that strikes me is that people often think that Western medicine is faster, right? If you have an issue, you go to the doctor, you get a pill, and you're good to go. But what your journey actually has told us is that that's not the case at all because you kept
Yeah, it's
getting
a
all of this
band-aid.
bad information that was not right for you. And when you started to figure out what was right, it seemed like that actually sped up your healing so much more quickly. So I think that's an
It did.
interesting, yeah. And so it's a continual evolving process. And if we paid attention to our bodies and our intuition and our knowing, we'd probably heal a lot faster because we wouldn't be putting all of this toxic stuff into
It
ourselves to
wouldn't,
begin
and
with.
we wouldn't have the epidemic of chronic disease and mental illness that we have.
Exactly. Exactly.
It wouldn't be the way it is.
Right.
You can look at that based upon history with indigenous cultures that were
Right.
fine before white settlers came in. African indigenous areas that still live the same way they lived before slavery was in
Yeah.
existence in America. They thrive. We think they need help. They do not need help.
Right.
Indigenous cultures in Australia and New Zealand that still live the exact same way, or in Alaska, these remote areas,
Yeah.
they still live the same way they've been living for thousands of years. They don't need our help. They're just fine. Or the blue zones. It's an ego thing of like, we think we know more.
I had a
It's
really
not.
interesting experience. Dave and I went to Belize once and we took a journey on a bus to this remote village in the
Mhm.
jungle. And what it was so striking to me was thinking about indigenous people. These folks basically had to depend upon all of
Each
the
other.
plants in that jungle in order to survive. It was a little terrifying thinking about, well, gosh, what if you had something really serious and there's no hospitals or doctors nearby? You have to know which plants you can use to heal yourself. And to think that people are living that way still, even in
Mhm.
this modernized world that we're all in, is really quite remarkable.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I don't want to go back to days without indoor plumbing, but technology is not the end all be all. It's really not. Like
Right. I mean,
it's on
it has its great uses.
right. It has a time and place, but when you are so focused only on that aspect and you miss so much more that is out there.
Yeah. So, Amy, what's one thing that you wish I would have asked you?
Because I feel like I said so much. I never feel like there's a depth of information because I talk so much.
Well, you have a remarkable story and an incredible command of information. So, of course, that would make sense that you talk a lot. So,
I
well,
don't even
thank
know.
you.
Well, people
Yeah.
can find me at Mind, Body, Spirit, Breath, and the book is called The Journey of Unlearning to Regain Trust in Healing, and Amy will have it in the show notes. And
Awesome.
grab your free breathwork session.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining me for the Green Living Now podcast. I hope you found the conversation inspiring and useful. And if you did, I would love it if you subscribed to my channel, left a review, and shared it with somebody that you think might be interested in green living. It helps us reach more people who want to live healthy and sustainable lives. For more tips, resources, and to get a free preview of one of my online green living courses, you can go to my website, greenlivingnow.com, and I have a 7-day Green Living Kickstart Challenge. That is a free program that helps you take small, impactful steps to living a non toxic, eco friendly, and holistic life. And there'll be daily actions, pro tips, and there's an online community that you can join that will be there to support you along with me. And it's all at no cost. You'll find that link on the website, greenlivingnow.com as well. Until next time, remember, together, our small steps create a ripple effect for the planet. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.